I don't expect anyone to believe me when I say this, but I know what I saw and the memories still keep me up at night. This happened back in 2018 when I moved into a small apartment in a very old complex on the east side of town. I was 22, fresh out of college, working my first real job, and just happy to finally live on my own. The apartment wasn't much. One bedroom, thin walls, creaky floors, but it was cheap, and it had a huge window in the living room that overlooked the street. Across that street stood another old brick apartment building, maybe 6 stories tall. The first night I moved in, I remember looking across at the rows of windows and thinking how close they felt. It almost felt like the building was leaning in, watching me. At first, I didn't think anything of it. You get used to seeing other people's lives framed in windows. But about a week after moving in, I noticed something strange. Every night, right around 11 p.m., there would be a man standing in one of the windows across the street. The 5th floor, 3rd window from the left. He never moved, never turned on a light, just stood there, outlined in shadow, staring across the street. At me. The first night, I brushed it off. People stare out of windows all the time. Maybe he was a night owl. Maybe he couldn't sleep. But then the second night, the same thing happened. Same window, same time, same posture. By the 3rd night, it started to bother me. The room he stood in was pitch black, but the street light below gave just enough glow to outline his figure. I could never make out his face, but I could feel his eyes on me, even through the glass. I told myself I was being paranoid, until the 5th night when I decided to test it. I raised my hand and gave a little wave, and slowly, too slowly, he raised his hand and waved back. I dropped my arm immediately, heart hammering. There was something so deliberate about it, like he wanted me to know he saw me, like he wanted me to know he'd been watching all along. That night, I barely slept. The next morning, I mentioned it to a neighbor in the hallway. She was an older woman who'd lived in the building for years. When I described the man in the window, her expression froze. "That apartment's empty," she said. "It's been empty for over a decade. They shut off the power years ago." My stomach dropped. That night, I tried not to look. I closed my curtains, turned off the lights, and buried myself in bed. But curiosity gnawed at me. Around 11, I peeked through the curtains. He was there. Same place, same posture, but closer. He was pressed right up against the glass now, his head tilted slightly like he was trying to get a better look at me. I stumbled back and yanked the curtain shut. For the first time, I locked every door in my apartment. The next few nights blurred together. I stopped looking, but I could still feel it. That prickling sensation, like eyes boring into me through fabric and glass. Sometimes I thought I heard faint tapping sounds at my window. Once, I swore I saw the curtain shift when there was no breeze. One night, I broke down and called the landlord of the building across the street. He confirmed what my neighbor said. The unit was vacant. No tenant, no utilities, nothing. I hung up the phone trembling. But when I finally forced myself to look again, the man was still there. Only this time, he wasn't waving. He was pointing, straight at me. I can't even explain the kind of fear that went through me in that moment. I dropped the curtain and didn't move until morning. The next day, I packed up a few things and stayed with a friend for the week. When I came back, I told myself it had to be in my head. Sleep deprivation, stress, tricks of the light. But when I finally looked across the street again, the window was empty. For the first time in weeks, I felt relief. I thought maybe, somehow, whatever it was had ended. That night, I slept soundly, until I woke up around 3 a.m. to the sound of tapping. Not from across the street, from my own living room window. I froze in bed, too scared to breathe. The tapping was slow, steady, deliberate. I forced myself to look. My curtains were shut, but they bulged inward like something was pressing against them from outside. And then from behind the fabric, a hand dragged slowly down the glass. I moved out 2 days later. I never looked back. I've debated for years whether or not to share this story, because even now, when I think about it too much, I get that sickening feeling in my stomach like something is standing right behind me. I've gone camping a dozen times since then, but never in that part of the state again. And I never, ever will. This happened back in 2019. I was 21 at the time, and a few friends from college and I decided to go on a camping trip. There were 4 of us total. Me, my buddy Chris, his girlfriend Jenna, and our other friend Marcus. We all lived in the city, and Chris had the idea that a weekend in the wilderness would be a good way to unplug from everything. We picked a state forest about 3 hours from where we lived. None of us had ever been there, but Chris found some info online that said it had free campsites and some decent hiking trails. It wasn't a popular spot like national parks, more like an isolated patch of woods that only locals seemed to know about. That should have been our first warning sign. We left on a Friday afternoon and got there just as the sun was starting to go down. The forest was beautiful in that eerie kind of way, towering pine trees that blocked out most of the sky, and a thick carpet of dead needles and leaves that muffled every footstep. The air smelled like earth and resin, heavy and still. After driving down a dirt road that seemed to go on forever, we found a small clearing with a stone fire pit already set up. It looked perfect, so we decided to pitch our tents there. As the light faded, we got a fire going and cooked some hot dogs. The mood was light at first, laughing, telling stories, Jenna roasting marshmallows while Marcus cracked open beers. But as the night deepened, I started to notice how quiet the forest was. No crickets, no owls, no wind, just silence, except for the occasional snap of wood in the fire. It was around midnight when I thought I heard something. It was faint but distinct, like soft footsteps moving through the trees. I froze, listening. "Did you hear that?" I asked. "Hear what?" Chris said. "Like walking, out there." We all went quiet for a moment. The fire crackled. Then, sure enough, we heard it again. A crunch of leaves, slow and deliberate. It stopped as soon as we turned our heads toward the sound. "Probably a deer," Marcus said, trying to sound casual, but even he didn't look convinced. Eventually, we shrugged it off and went to our tents. Chris and Jenna shared one, while Marcus and I took the other. I fell asleep pretty quickly, but at some point in the middle of the night I woke up. At first I didn't know why. Then I realized what had woken me. Whispering. It was faint, like it was coming from right outside the tent. I held my breath and listened. "Come out!" My blood ran cold. I nudged Marcus, but he was dead asleep. The whispering continued, low and raspy, but I couldn't make out the words anymore. Just the cadence, like someone trying to coax me. I finally worked up the courage to unzip the tent just a few inches and peek outside. The fire had burned down to glowing embers. The forest beyond was pitch black, and standing just at the edge of the light was a figure, tall, motionless, watching. I yanked the zipper shut so fast it caught on the fabric and nearly jammed. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. In the morning, I tried to convince myself it was a dream, or maybe a trick of shadows. But then Jenna mentioned that something weird had happened to her too. She said she'd woken up because she thought she heard someone walking around their tent, circling it slowly. Chris joked that it was probably a raccoon, but I could see in her face that she didn't believe that. Neither did I. We decided to shake it off and go hiking. During the day, the forest didn't feel as menacing. Sunlight filtered through the trees, and the trails were easy enough to follow. But every now and then, I'd get this unsettling feeling, like we were being watched. I'd glance back, and for just a split second, I'd swear I saw movement, a pale shape between the trees. By late afternoon, we were back at camp, and that feeling of unease returned full force. Marcus tried to lighten the mood by telling ghost stories around the fire, but all it did was make us more paranoid. At one point, Chris went to grab his backpack from his tent, and he froze. "What the hell?" he muttered. We all went over to look. His backpack was shredded, not torn like by an animal, but slashed, long, deliberate cuts down the fabric. His food was gone, wrappers strewn in the dirt. "Dude, what the fuck did this?" Marcus asked. Chris shook his head. "This wasn't an animal. Look at the cuts, they're too clean." We sat in tense silence after that. None of us wanted to say it, but we were all thinking the same thing. Someone had been here. That night was worse. Much worse. We tried to sleep, but around 2 a.m. I woke up again. This time it wasn't whispers. It was humming, a low, guttural tune drifting through the trees. Marcus heard it too. His eyes were wide open in the dark, staring at me. We didn't move, didn't breathe, just listened. The humming got closer, and then, crunch. Footsteps right outside our tent. Slow, heavy, deliberate. They circled us once, then stopped directly in front. The fabric bulged inward like someone was pressing a hand against it. Marcus let out a strangled gasp. I grabbed his arm, trying to keep him quiet. My heart was slamming in my chest. Then, just as suddenly, it stopped. The humming faded, the pressure disappeared, and the footsteps retreated into the woods. We stayed frozen until dawn. When the sun finally rose, we stumbled out of the tent, exhausted and shaken. Chris and Jenna looked just as bad. They said they'd heard it too. The humming, the footsteps. That was enough. We agreed to pack up and leave. But when we went to gather our things, we saw something that made my stomach turn to ice. All around our campsite, carved into the trunks of the trees, were symbols. Strange, jagged symbols, burned into the bark like they'd been scorched there. And hanging from one of the branches, swaying gently in the breeze, was a piece of rope tied into a noose. None of us spoke. We just threw everything into the car and got the hell out of there. The ride home was dead silent. None of us wanted to talk about it. But here's the part that still haunts me to this day. That night, after I finally got home and collapsed into bed, I woke up around 3 a.m. My bedroom was dark, the street outside quiet, and from outside my window, faint but unmistakable, I heard humming. I used to think the whole monster under the bed thing was just a cliche, something kids invented to explain away their fear of the dark. But what happened to me when I was 12 years old made me realize that sometimes those childhood fears come from somewhere very, very real. We had just moved into a new house that summer. My parents were thrilled because it was bigger than our old place, and it sat on a quiet street with hardly any traffic. My room was at the end of the hallway upstairs. It was bigger than the one I'd had before, and for the first couple weeks, I loved it. The bed my parents bought me was one of those simple wooden frames with space underneath, enough to store boxes or slide things out of sight. I remember lying on it the first night, staring into the darkness beneath and getting that little twinge of unease. But I brushed it off. I was 12, I told myself, too old to be afraid of something under the bed. The first couple nights were fine, but then about a week in, I started hearing it. At first, it was just a scratching sound, light, faint, like fingernails dragging across wood. I'd wake up at 2 or 3 a.m. and hear it coming from directly beneath me. My heart would pound, but I'd force myself to ignore it. I told myself it was just the house settling, or maybe a mouse. But then the whispers started. They were so quiet at first that I thought I was dreaming them. A soft hiss of words that I couldn't quite make out, but the longer I listened, the clearer they became. Come down here. Just look. I'm waiting. I'd yank the covers over my head, shaking, praying for sleep to take me. One night I got so scared I screamed for my parents. They came rushing in, turned on the light, and looked under the bed. Nothing. Just boxes of toys and old clothes. They told me I was having nightmares. But I knew I wasn't. Because the next night when I woke up to the whispers again, something reached out. I felt it. A cold hand brushing against my ankle just for a second before I jerked my leg away. I shot upright in bed, staring at the space beneath me. The whispers stopped. The scratching stopped. It was dead silent. I didn't sleep at all after that. Over the next week, it got worse. The hand started grabbing, not just brushing. Always quick, always retreating the second I pulled away. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. Sometimes I swore I heard my own name. Daniel. That was the night I broke down crying and begged my parents to let me sleep in their room. They were annoyed, but they let me. I slept on their floor for 2 nights, and for the first time in weeks, I felt safe. But parents don't believe in monsters under the bed. By the 3rd night, they made me go back to my room. That's when I decided to prove it. I stayed awake, clutching a flashlight, waiting. Hours passed. Just when my eyelids started to droop, I heard it. The scratching, the whispering. Look at me. I flicked on the flashlight and leaned over the side of the bed, shining it underneath. At first, I saw nothing but the boxes. My heart slowed. Maybe it really was just in my head. Then one of the boxes shifted, slowly, deliberately, and 2 pale hands slid into view, pulling it back. I froze, my breath caught in my throat, and then I saw its face. It was human, but not. Too long, too thin. Its skin was gray, stretched tight across sharp bones. Its eyes were sunken but glowed faintly in the beam of my flashlight. And its mouth, God, its mouth, was stretched into a wide, jagged grin, teeth too many and too sharp. It stared at me, unblinking. I dropped the flashlight and scrambled back against the headboard, screaming. My parents came rushing in, flipping on the lights. Of course, by the time they looked under the bed, it was gone. They were furious, told me I needed to stop watching scary movies and making things up. But I knew the truth. For the next month, I barely slept. I'd pile pillows and blankets on the floor and sleep there instead, too scared to be above the bed. The whispers never stopped, though. Sometimes I'd hear them coming from the closet or the corners of the room, always just out of sight. One night, I worked up the courage to sleep in my bed again. I figured maybe if I showed no fear, it would stop. I lasted until about 3 a.m. That's when I woke up to the sound of breathing. Not mine. Something was breathing under my bed. Slow, deep, ragged breaths, as if it was savoring every moment. I lay there frozen, tears streaming down my face until the breathing stopped, and then in the silence I heard it whisper, clearer than ever. Soon. That was the last straw. I refused to sleep in that room ever again. My parents eventually gave in and let me switch to the guest room down the hall. After that, the whispers stopped, the scratching stopped. I thought maybe I was safe. But sometimes, even now, when I'm lying in bed in the dark, I'll feel it. That same cold hand brushing against my ankle, waiting.